Um, we are about to start back our meeting, and first of all, someone maybe left in the ladies' restroom a mobile phone. No. No. Hi. Welcome. Should I leave? Yes. Yeah. I'm going to put it back there because maybe it's somebody else. Okay. Okay, let us also welcome our colleague Jairo, who joined us is a member of the PCCB and joined us for the rest of the meeting as he was traveling to Bonn. And we also have an announcement, a change in the schedule for tomorrow. There will be the closing informal consultation on matters relating to capacity building, scheduled now from 12 to 1 p.m. Therefore, we will close earlier the meeting of the PCCB tomorrow, and so after the coffee break from 11 to 12, we will close, and we will only reconvene after the lunch break at 3 p.m. And well, we will go on with the agenda, and we'll follow our regular schedule in discussing the remaining parts of the agenda and the second part of final of agenda item 5, and the PCCB closed session will be moved to Wednesday morning instead of Tuesday afternoon. So it will be on Wednesday morning from at 9 a.m. in this room. The adjusted agenda has been posted online, and you can see it also here on the screen. And also the Secretariat team kindly circulated already among partners, among members of the PCCB, the concept note of the workshop to be organized possibly to be organized in collaboration with the Standing Committee of Finance, of which we were talking this morning, and we will discuss it tomorrow morning. Okay. And yes, on Wednesday morning in the closed session. And now I would like to invite the committee to turn to agenda item 4B, part 3, technical session focusing on enhancing the ownership of developing countries of building and maintaining capacity at the 5th Capacity Building Hub. The PCCB here is invited to discuss the planning of this technical session. We launched our technical paper entitled Enhancing the Ownership of Developing Countries of Building and Maintaining Capacity for Climate Action at COP27, and this will of course serve as one input for the preparation of the session. My fellow PCCB member, my fellow co-chair, Rosie Bell-Martinez, will provide a very short recap of the main findings of the technical paper, and this will be followed by a plenary discussion under this agenda sub-item to publish information and, to gather additional perspective and inputs from the PCCB members and observers. So, please, Rosie Bell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Roberta. So the technical paper identified a number of challenges at the provider and at the domestic level with regard to capacity building. In terms of challenges at the capacity building provider level, The paper found that some capacity building providers continue to carry out capacity building interventions that are not based on domestic priorities and needs, or continue to be guided by a one-size-fits-all approach, with little adjustment to local contexts or the assumption of the validity and applicability of developed country knowledge to all contexts and situations. Many of the interventions are limited to short-term approaches, lacking the required buy-in from participating stakeholders. Many capacity building providers also continue to have in place onerous requirements for applying for capacity building support, which many developing countries stakeholders cannot meet due to a lack of human, technical, and financial resources. And finally, monitoring and evaluation may be limited to indicators that often only focus on quantitative outputs without focus on better ways of understanding positive effects of networks, relationships, and changed attitudes and behaviors. It was found at the domestic level. In terms of challenges at the domestic level, we found that developing country parties often have limited human resources and technical capacity to apply for capacity building support and comply with respective reporting requirements. Coordination between government entities at and in between the national, subnational, and local levels, as well as the different stakeholder groups, can be difficult to achieve and thus prevent effective implementation of capacity building interventions. Non-party stakeholders often face inadequate infrastructure and modalities to exchange with their peers domestically. We also found that maintaining capacity at the individual level can be challenging as individuals, in particular at the subnational level, often move to different jobs within their country or internationally. And finally, uneven power dynamics between capacity building providers and developing country parties and between institutions within developing countries can result in goals and objectives that are not in line with the local needs. These are the
Thank you very much,
findings.
Elizabeth.
Now
Yes.
we think we go for the recommendations. Okay, I
Yes,
think.
now we erase, so we invite. Okay. you
So I'll finish
continue.
with the
Okay.
recommendations.
Yes.
So, this paper includes a concrete set of recommendations to address the identified challenges, which are highlighted in this slide shown before us. First, support should be increased for holistic capacity building assessment at national, subnational, and local levels, building on successful approaches used for technology needs assessment and development of technology action plans. Second, a multi-stakeholder approach. Do we have it on the screen? A multi-stakeholder approach should be applied by engaging a broad range of party and non-party stakeholders across national, subnational, and local levels, including academia, civil society, indigenous peoples, youth, and the private sector, when undertaking capacity needs assessment and when designing, planning, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating capacity building interventions based on identified needs. There's also a need to foster political support by highlighting co-benefits of capacity building for climate action, including financial benefits, for example, through increased resilience, cost savings through more resource-efficient approaches, and income generation, for example, through the ability to benefit from international carbon markets. We also recommend that long-term capacity building interventions need to be developed, moving away from project-based programmatic approaches that aim to become self-sufficient. We also found that international, regional, and domestic knowledge networks, platforms, and communities of practices and peer-to-peer support should be strengthened. It is also important to build on local capacity and indigenous knowledge and develop national and regional rosters of experts on relevant issues to access available expertise more easily. Furthermore, incentive schemes and mechanisms need to be developed to maintain capacity in developing countries, in particular LDCs and SIDS, including through improved working conditions for domestic experts. Our paper also recommends that developing countries should ensure that more climate finance is available for standalone capacity building programs at the national and local levels, and that such funding can be accessed by both party and non-party stakeholders. Also, developed countries should increase coordination among capacity building providers from developed and developing countries' entities to ensure more informed, coherent, and transformative capacity building approaches, better dissemination of information on available capacity building support, and less onerous application and reporting processes. And finally, developed countries and multilateral institutions should provide dedicated and predictable long-term support for the strengthening of institutional arrangements in developing countries that can facilitate capacity building across the different areas of adaptation and mitigation action. With this, I'll hand it over to you, Roberta. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rosibel, for sharing with us the findings of the technical paper. And dear members, now we are all invited to raise any issue on that are important for us or for you, and make any suggestion for the content and format of the technical session that will take place at the Capacity Building Hub at next COP. And I believe it would make sense to start by looking at the objective of our event. What do we want to achieve with this session? So on the screen, I think these are still the recommendations, but you will see. Okay. You will see later. A number of guiding questions. But we can also read them. Yes, oh, here they are. So you can see a number of guiding questions for our discussion, but please feel free to ask further questions and raise any other issues too. So the guiding questions are: what should be the objective of the session? What would be the scope of the session? Are there specific subtopics that should be addressed? Who could be invited as resource person for the session? And I now open the floor first to the PCCB member and then, of course, to our observers. If there is any request from the floor, just let me know. Okay, so maybe also our new members didn't have yet the time to familiarize with the technical paper that was developed on enhancing the ownership of developing countries of building and maintaining capacity for climate action. So I'm sure we will have also other more time to finalize the contents and invitations to be addressed to potential speaker at the technical session we will have at the Capacity Building Hub this year. So, and if members do not have other comments on this, we can already open the floor to observers. Again, you can see the guiding questions, and the discussion is on a technical session at the Capacity Building Hub to address and discuss how to enhance the ownership of developing countries of building and maintaining capacity. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mrs. Co-Chair. This is Anbar, representing the Women and Gender constituency. I've seen that you're talking about how integrating experts for capacity building, and talking also about rosters of experts. On this, I wanted to raise attention on the fact that the CTCN and the TEC are launching new gender expert rosters, which will be available on the website of the CTCN. And maybe for the capacity building hub at COP28, it would be a good idea to have an event highlighting this. This would fall perfectly into the activities of the ICG, if I do the shortening correctly. So that's a first idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And no, absolutely, we already discussed during the last ICG with the representative of constituted bodies about the possibility for them to use as much as possible the capacity building hub. So as soon as we will start the arrangement and launch the call for interest, of course, any proposal by the ICG members will be taken into consideration. And thank you very much for mentioning it. Please, Makoto.
Thank you very much. Well, sorry, maybe my question is not relevant. Just a simple question. Before Roberta, there was a list of recommendations introduced. Is this connected with those recommendations, or completely different things?
No, yes, it's it's linked in the sense the recommendations are the recommendations that emerged from the technical paper that was prepared on country ownership, how to maintain ownership in developing country parties, and building on this technical paper. We are looking at organizing a technical session at the capacity building hub. So the findings of the technical paper can be picked up or can be further discussed in the technical discussion at the capacity building hub.
So in that case, are we supposed to give any observers' reflection on the draft recommendation that were provided at this time, or maybe should we come back later, and then we should make comment on this guiding questions, which okay.
Yes, just. Yes. So, and just to clarify, these are the findings of the technical paper on country ownership that we are suggesting to be used for the technical session to be organized. Then there are the recommendation of the PCCB on country ownership that are also like derived from the technical paper and will be in the annual technical report and will be discussed as next agenda item. So yes, now we are focusing on the event, the technical session on country ownership of capacity building to be organized at the capacity building hub at COP.
Okay,
yes,
now it's clear. So that I can focus on these things, and I think these are very useful setting, and I think I would hope that there are a good mixture of different stakeholders especially the number one is like representatives and colleagues from developing country parties. So I think that they're having challenge and they're making great efforts within the country to coordinate, prioritize, and I think sometimes it's really difficult. So I think, and also lack of resources or those things. So that I hope we're having those who are engaged in is either coordinating inside the government or implementing capacity building related project, or again project-based approaches. I think there are shortcoming things, so that if there are any program or a little bit longer term cooperation experiences, or if there are any successful cases, because I think what the idea is that we want to replicate and expand for those successful things for in future. So that, of course, we understand there are shortcomings or like lots of challenges at this point of time, but we do hope there are somebody who is, of course, from like a provider side, that's fine. But I think what is very interesting to me is that for somebody from developing country partners, that they are somehow successful, and maybe they can also provide challenges together with those who are engaged in the, for example, I am from the development cooperation community, but we listen to each other always. But I think the real voice from colleagues from developing country parties, or not necessarily party representatives, but the practitioners. Yeah, and then on the top of it, maybe not only the government. It's not only the government which played a critical role in implementing and disseminating capacity, including for their retention of capacity, so that from my own experience, we do see somebody who is around the government, either institutions or even private consultants, but not foreign ones. Yeah, but so those, I think, if we can have those kind of people around the government who is supporting with the government and efforts in developing countries, well, I think that's something that we can learn very well from those people. So this is my suggestion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Makoto. And indeed, I guess it will be another chance also for the PCCB network members to prove the importance of having like such a network of practitioners and entities on the ground in developing countries and connected with the PCCB and with the process. Thank you very much. Please.
Yes, this is Greg Walker from Mediators Beyond Borders and Oregon State University. I think this is a very important session to have at the Hub. I want to offer a couple of questions or just thoughts on this. When we look at the objective, is it the same for all country parties? In other words, if the purpose is to focus on enhancing the ownership of developing countries in terms of capacity building, and doing it in a way that applies to all developing countries, that suggests a particular approach to the day. On the other hand, if the objective was to recognize the way in which developing countries are different, so the capacity building needs of Botswana might be different from the Seychelles, from Uruguay, then it would suggest a different approach to the session. And as an example, one approach could be something that's a tool or technique that many of you may be familiar with, which is called asset mapping. And it's where you basically ask a country to identify its capacity building gaps and needs, and then to identify the assets it has within country to develop those, to address those gaps and needs, and also to discover where they're missing some resources that they might need and where they might get those resources. Not necessarily from outside consultants coming from Northern Hemisphere universities, but perhaps from universities in their own country or region, or from NGOs within their own country or region. So it seems to me that the objective of the session and the scope of the session will will relate to each other, and if the objective is kind of a general approach that perhaps all developing countries can relate to, or is it one that's more customized or tailored to the individual capacity building gaps and needs of the countries that choose to participate in the hub that day? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you for the suggestion in terms of point of view to be that can be like used to look at this technical session, and I think we definitely will take into consideration both aspects of looking at this issue. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. If there are no other comments or suggestions, we take from the observers that there is a general interest in having the session, the technical session, very much solution focused, and we invite you to provide any further comment or suggestion through the in-meeting survey on SurveyMonkey that can be posted again on the screen. Okay, you can see it there. And now the last item for discussion in today's meeting is agenda item 5 on recommendation of the Paris Agreement of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building to parties. This item is split in 2 sessions, with the second session scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. And the related background document is PCCB/2023/5. The PCCB is invited here to consider the draft recommendations to parties for consideration by COP28 and CMA5 contained in the annex of the background document, and to collect inputs and feedback from observers here at the 7th meeting of the PCCB. At the end of the second session, focus on the recommendation, which will take place tomorrow. The PCCB will also be invited to agree on next steps with regard to finalizing the recommendations. For the benefit of our new members and observers in the room, I will now provide some background information on the PCCB recommendation to parties, but also refer you once more to the background document, which where you will find all the relevant information and the listed recommendations. The COP and the CMA mandated the PCCB to provide recommendations to parties across several of our work areas. According to our 2021-2024 work plan, the PCCB is to provide recommendations to the COP and or the CMA as appropriate under sub-activities A.2, B.3.2, and C.2 on the following topics: improving coherence and coordination of capacity building and avoiding duplication of efforts, enhancing developing country ownership of building and maintaining capacity, enhancing the sharing of good practices, experience and lessons learned related to capacity building among relevant bodies under and outside the Convention and the Paris Agreement, identifying potential areas of collaborative work with bodies whose work is relevant to the PCCB and its work plan, and determining how information from the Durban Forum can be utilized by bodies under and outside the Convention. So draft recommendations on areas A, B, and C have been prepared as an input to this meeting. based on available information from activities completed by the PCCB and are included in the annex of the background document. Recommendation on areas D and E will be prepared after the 7th meeting of the PCCB, as they are dependent on the outcomes of the 12th Urban Forum and the 5th meeting of the ICG respectively, which have been held in conjunction with SB 58, so last week. Having provided this information, we will now be starting 2 parallel breakout group discussions. Group 1 will consider and discuss the draft recommendations prepared on Area A, coherence and coordination of capacity building, and Group 2 will discuss the draft recommendation for Area B, ownership of capacity building. So Group 1 can stay on this side of the room, and Group 2, so here and on the back, where they see the flip charts. Group 1 and Group 2 is at the back. And after 20 minutes, everyone will be asked to switch to the other group so that all members and observers could take part in both the sessions. And the facilitators of each group will then present the discussion outcomes briefly in plenary. And tomorrow we are going to have the same approach and have 2 breakout groups in parallel on Area C recommendation, and 1 discussing the question on how we can enhance the reach and impact of our recommendation, especially at national and subnational level. And so more of this one tomorrow. Now I kindly request everyone to join one of the 2 groups. The Secretariat will announce when it is time to switch from one group to the other, and we hope to have the similar number of participants since the beginning in the 2 groups. Okay. We also, as member, will join.
Members join and are
yes.
welcome to.
And then take it. Coherence and coordination here in the front, and ownership of capacity building at the back. And again, the discussion will be about the recommendation contained so far in the draft report for parties and observers to consider them and comment on them for further refinement. Thank you.
Colleagues need to wrap up in 2 minutes exactly, please.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for your active participation. And now we listen to the conclusions of the group from the co-facilitators of group number 1 and group number 2, starting with group number 1, which was facilitated by Fahad.
Thank you very much. In our group, we had one of the recommendations was enhancing coherence and coordination of capacity building and avoiding duplication efforts. And as we know, the recommendations that were proposed, we had some additional inputs that we think they need to be included in the recommendation that have been proposed. Issue of course, when you talk of climate change is a cross-sector issue of capacity building. So we need to strengthen the legal arrangement when it comes to capacity building and climate change. We need the ownership of our government to see that climate change is an issue that need to be addressed. We need to review the legal framework that is in place to include the climate change governance, so that the government can oversee what's happening within the climate change issues. The issue of involving each and everyone, do not leave anyone behind. The issue of data sharing. There's a need to have a database so that we know who's doing what, who's involved in the government, what are they doing, so that we don't duplicate. Because the issue here is not to avoid duplication. So we need to have a database so that we know what's going on. The issue of finance, it came up very strongly, because if we want to build capacity, we want to increase coordination, coherence, we cannot do that without financing. So issue of climate change, climate finance came up very strongly. The issue involvement of scientific community in terms of academia, researchers, indigenous, the local knowledge is very important when we talk of capacity building on climate change. The M&E came up very strongly as well, because we need to monitor what is going on. So M&E and reporting is very important. And the issue, when you talk of reporting, you're not talking reporting, you're talking on reporting on quantitative and qualitative. I think that came up very strongly, that we need to, when we do M&E, we need to look at both of those things. The issue of involving private sectors is very important. The CBOs, NGOs, private sector, that's also came up very strongly. So, and one thing that came out as well was the issue of leadership and governance. That's also was captured in our discussion. So all in all, we need to take these inputs into consideration when we look at enhancing coherence and coordination when you're talking about climate change, enhancing of capacity on climate change issue. I shall stop here for now. If anybody from my group have anything to add, the floor is open. Do you want to add anything? I missed.
I think you've
good. Okay then. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Farhad, for facilitating group number 1. And as regard group number 2, Jairo facilitated the discussion and will now deliver the conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. I think that our dear PCCB colleague Farhad pretty much covered many areas that are overlapping with our discussion. But anyway, I will sum up briefly the points that we have discussed together. We have been discussing the importance of non-state actors in designing and implementing policies and measures that are related to capacity building and maintaining this capacity. The role of indigenous people are emphasized, or is emphasized. Also, importance in this regard, the training of local capacities, and to ensure coordination across all these kinds of capacity building activities. The role of the national level committee is also suggested, is also highlighted, and with the concrete working groups which can support the national level to coordinate activities to relate to capacity building. Also, there is a discussion about institutionalizing the capacity building activities at the national, subnational, local levels. And to this regard, the legal framework can be critical to achieve the objectives set by governments in order to ensure institutional engagement of national and national actors and non-state actors. There is also interesting example of Kenya, which underlined as the role that the centralized agency can have in this regard to coordinate capacity building activities across sectors. And also we have some practical example of doing this under Article 6 in Zimbabwe, when legal frame that ensures institutionalized approach for the government has been critical. Also, there is a highlight of vertical and horizontal integration at all levels, including local levels, for example, farmers, private sector. Engagement can be ensured through the government concrete efforts to ensure to achieve adaptation goals at the national level. I think during the second second discussion, we emphasized also the importance of the terminology that we use in the recommendations list. There is a discussion, an interesting discussion about the climate finance, that it should be emphasized as available or adequate. There are some other interesting discussions that covered the capacity building scope. Should the phrase underlined like standalone capacity building, or given that capacity building comes across different sectors, and not in many cases it can be considered as the standalone capacity building. And the priorities of governments are utmost importance when it comes to formulate capacity building. I think there are also other interesting points, inputs, but I couldn't catch probably everything. If anything I missed, please, colleagues, you can add. No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jairo. Once again, thanks to both our co-facilitators for this afternoon. And once again, let me invite observers to send any other view through the SurveyMonkey survey. And again, thank you all for actively participating in the discussion. So now we are getting to the end of today. So my co-chair and I sincerely thank you all for the very useful input throughout the whole day. And I think we had a very good discussion, and many things also for us to digest. I see a request for the floor, please.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I actually wanted to make an intervention earlier, but I find the discussion was so useful and informative that I decided to make it later. So it's the first time I took the floor, so I'd like to thank the PCCB. I'm sorry, I'm actually speaking on behalf of Singapore, the party. and we support the seats a member on the PCCB from our delegate from Grenada. But I'd like to, since it's the first time I take the floor, I'd like to thank the PCCB for actually continuing to do a good job in matters related to capacity building. I actually think it's one of the better functioning mechanism under the Paris Agreement, because I think the members work very well together, and it's not a political mechanism. I have just a couple of comments. I think mostly procedural. So I think for the PCCB's plan to call for submission on tools for assessing and addressing capacity gaps and needs related to climate finance, I think it's a good move. It helps us to identify gaps and resources. My more procedurally is that I think there's a paragraph that says that define climate finance as a local, national, and transnational financing. I'd just like to point out that actually there's no agreed definition on climate finance. It's something which the Standing Committee on Finance is actually preparing. In fact, they've been working on it for a couple of years, and they're supposed to submit a report on the definition on climate finance during COP28. So as far as possible, perhaps we should, the PCCB should maybe not define climate finance in this current call for submission. So we can actually remove that paragraph on the PCCB definition of climate finance, or simply add a footnote to say we can see the report of the Standing Committee on Finance, October 2022, on the operational definition of climate finance. I'm sure the Secretariat has a line. And on my final comment is more on the work of the PCCB. Like I mentioned, the committee, I think, has been doing a good job, but it's because of the way it kept to the mandate of the Paris Agreement. And this is why I think on issues like climate finance, there's actually a very balanced line that it has to walk regards to the provision of finances from developing country. So we have to take, so for languages on climate finance, I think it's best to take the language from Article 9, or Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, because that relates to parties' agreement on the issue of climate finance. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Singapore. Indeed, very precise comments, and we used like common UNFCCC language, but absolutely right, there is not the definition of climate finance, and we'll be so glad to adjust according to your comments the call for submission. And if there are no other requests for the floors or comments, we can adjourn the meeting for today. We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 10 to continue our discussion. And if now that I still have everyone attention, there is this film screening and reception with the Transformative Urban Coalition project right here in room 2309. So for those of you who wants to stay with us some more time, there is this film screening. Thank you again for staying with us and participating so actively in the PCCB meeting today. And thank you. Thank you. One more welcome to the new co-chair Rosibel, the new members, and we'll meet tomorrow morning. If you want to add.
No, yes, thank you very much. A great day today. I know we'll have a wonderful 3 days, and thank you. See you at the movies.